everyone, my name is Tineke.
And I'm Chloe.
And we are 5 times more. On today's episode, we have a special guest joining us. The topic today is miscarriage. And there is nobody better versed to talk about this than our lovely Amina. Would you mind introducing yourself for our audience, please?
Hi, I'm so pleased to be here. My name's Amina Haita and I am the midwifery manager at Tommy's. I'm also an NHS midwife working in a large London teaching hospital as well.
Thank you so much for that, Amina. I guess we'll just go in straight into the first question.
So the first question is, what is miscarriage and are there different types of miscarriages?
So this is such an important question, and I think it's the whole area of miscarriage is so poorly understood. If we're looking at like a legal official definition of miscarriage, that refers to the loss of a baby or the ending of a pregnancy before 24 weeks. So that's from finding out you're pregnant up until around kind of the 6-month mark in your pregnancy. Now, as you can see, that's such a wide range of pregnancy, and that covers so much of pregnancy as well. And what it doesn't do is it doesn't highlight that miscarriage can actually refer to lots of different kinds of pregnancy loss at different times in a pregnancy. The most common, most kind of miscarriage that happens the most often tends to happen in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy, sometimes referred to as the first trimester, and that's what's commonly referred to as early miscarriage. So about 10 to 20% of miscarriages happen in that kind of first 12 weeks of pregnancy. Within that framing of the first 12 weeks, there's also a lot of variation as well. So there's something that's referred to a miscarriage, which happens when your pregnancy ends or your baby dies in the uterus, but you don't have any signs or symptoms of that miscarriage happening, such as bleeding or pain. So for lots of people, they continue to feel pregnant, they continue to have pregnancy symptoms, and often, really sadly, it's only been discovered that the miscarriage has happened when they go for a routine ultrasound scan, which most people know happen around 11 or 12 weeks as part of their antenatal care. And that can be really, really shocking. You've gone expecting to see your baby, to be given information, and then sadly you've been told that there isn't a heartbeat there, or that baby is smaller than expected and doesn't look like the pregnancy is going to progress into an ongoing healthy pregnancy. So that's miscarriage. Another term that people may hear about is something called a threatened miscarriage, which is when you start to experience bleeding or pain, or the two in combination, again in the first 12 weeks, but you haven't yet miscarried. And sometimes it's not an official term, but sometimes people might say, this looks like a threatened miscarriage, that we know the signs of miscarriage are there, but you haven't miscarried yet. Another term used is a chemical pregnancy, sometimes referred to a biochemical pregnancy. This can happen really, really early on in pregnancy, usually around 4 or 5 weeks. For most people, it can be that they've taken a pregnancy test, they found out they're pregnant because a pregnancy test has detected those pregnancy hormones, but the pregnancy has ended sometimes the next day when they test again, a couple of days later, a week or so later, or even before they've had a scan, they've started bleeding. And sometimes people are a little bit in limbo thinking, was that just a delayed period? But you've had that positive pregnancy test, which tells you that you were pregnancy. So that's where, again, it can be really quite traumatic, because you have found out you're pregnant and then suddenly things have changed very, very quickly and you're not sure what help you can get with that. An incomplete miscarriage is when a miscarriage starts. So you start to experience some of those signs and symptoms of a miscarriage, but some of the pregnancy tissue or your baby's remains kind of stay within the uterus, and then you kind of need some additional help with it as well. And then there's recurrent miscarriage, where you experience 3 or more early miscarriages. So again, within the first 12 weeks, even if you've had a successful pregnancy in between. And that's been a relatively recent change. In the past, it used to be for something to be referred to as a recurrent miscarriage, you'd need to have 3 miscarriages in a row. But more recently, a recurrent miscarriage is anybody who has experienced 3 or more early miscarriages. And then there are less common kind of miscarriages, even though they are still very, very difficult and equally traumatic. So there's something referred to as second trimester loss, or a late miscarriage, which happens from 13 weeks of pregnancy up until that 24 weeks of pregnancy. About 1 to 2% of pregnancies are affected by a second trimester loss or a late miscarriage. There's ectopic pregnancies, which are different to miscarriages, but again are pregnancy loss in the early stages of pregnancy. About 1 in 80 pregnancies can be ectopic pregnancies. And then there's also something referred to as a molar pregnancy, which happens when there is either too much or too little genetic material in a fertilized egg and a baby just can't develop. So clusters of abnormal cells or water-filled sacs develop in the uterus instead of a baby developing. So as you can see, I've kind of waffled on a little bit there, but that's because miscarriage refers to so many different things. And sometimes a person may experience 1 or 2 of those things together. They might start off with, a threatened miscarriage, and then, it becomes an incomplete miscarriage, or they've started off with a miscarriage, or they are going through a recurrent miscarriage as well.
Thank you for that. That was very, very helpful. I thought I knew a lot about miscarriages, but listening to you talk now, I don't think I knew as much as I thought I did.
Yeah, I didn't realize there was. Well, I know the different types, but in terms of like even molar pregnancy, like you don't realize just how many different forms and types there are, which are still all devastating nonetheless, as well. Just for this is actually for my own questioning, and I'm going off script here, but let's keep it real. Would vanishing twin syndrome be a type of miscarriage as well?
Yeah, it absolutely would be, and I think it's really important to bring that up. I think there's sometimes even those of us who work in this area are on, can kind of have that oversight of thinking actually, but absolutely. So vanishing twin syndrome, for anybody who doesn't know, is when your pregnancy starts off as a twin pregnancy, and then either you've had a scan which will have confirmed that you have a twin pregnancy, and then either you start experiencing some bleeding or some pain, and sadly one of those babies will end as a miscarriage, or that at the next scan that second kind of baby can't be seen, and that's where it speaks about kind of vanishing twin syndrome as well.
Thank you. Can you describe any common misconceptions about miscarriage that you have encountered before?
There are so many misconceptions when it comes to miscarriage, and I could talk for hours about this, but I'm kind of thinking about the kind of most common ones that we at Tommy's on the helpline, for example, experience is, the first one is that there's no support available after you've had a miscarriage. That's really, really common when people come through on the helpline. They're really surprised that there's support available, that even after one miscarriage, there are tests that can be carried out, that they can speak to either the doctor who's seen them in the early pregnancy unit or to their GP about getting support with that. So people just kind of thinking, oh, a miscarriage happens and I just have to kind of carry on and get on with it, and that I can't get any help or support. There's no one there to answer questions for me. Another kind of common misconception is that miscarriage can only be managed in one way, or that you have no options in your care. So often when people on the Tommy's helpline contact us, will say to us that, I've been told that I need to have, I have to watch and wait, or that I need to take a certain kind of medication, and I'm really frightened about it because I don't know when it's going to happen, or it happened to my friend, and but I've been told that's what I have to do, and not realizing that a decision should be made only after you have been given the opportunity to explore the different options, such as expectant management, medical management, surgical management. And actually a decision can only be made when you feel that you have all of the information and what you feel is right for you. People feel like they just have to follow what they've been told or the consultant has told them, rather than actually this doesn't sit right with me, or this has happened in the past and it didn't work for me, and actually I'd like to advocate for this. And then finally, it's the idea that people don't experience grief or loss after an early miscarriage. People are sometimes told that it's not really a loss, that it, you know, at least it was early on, at least you didn't get attached to the baby, and not recognize that actually after miscarriage there can be really deep grief, trauma. It has a real long-lasting impact on you whenever that miscarriage has happened, whether it be at 4 weeks, whether it be at 18 weeks, and that it can go on to impact your next pregnancy. It can go on to impact your parenting as well. And also that, you know, it's only the person who has experienced a miscarriage who will feel any of these emotions. It doesn't take into fact that actually partners are affected by miscarriage, family members, younger siblings, all of those people can be affected by my miscarriage loss. That is much wider than just it's happened to you and you should kind of pick yourself up and carry on.
Yeah, that's very true. Especially a bit about the partners and wider family members. Like, everyone's excited that you're having a baby, and now so that can definitely have an impact, even though it's not directly happened to them. They always kind of get missed out.
I was also going to say, people not acknowledging that you actually have a loss, and there was a bit of connection there, seeing it as what you said, oh, you know, you didn't get to know the baby. It's still a loss. A loss is a loss.
It's this very strange idea that, like, I always say that for most people, when you find out you're pregnant, you don't think, oh, well, it's just an embryo or it's a ball of cells, or you might even think that, but the moment you find out you're pregnant, you start planning a whole life ahead. You know, you start thinking, this is my family, either starting of, you know, out of my journey into becoming a family or expanding my family. You start thinking ahead. You don't ever just think at that moment. And when a miscarriage happens, it's that grief in the immediacy of that loss of pregnancy, but also that whole loss of future as well, that everything that could have happened would have happened. You know, there's that whole left there that people, when they kind of say things like, oh, well, it was early and you weren't attached, and you go, you're attached from the moment you find out you're pregnant.
Yeah,
that's a terrible thing to say.
So
I think if you've got nothing to say, just don't say it. I think what they're trying to do is say something nice.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Yeah. It's not knowing what to say, so you think you can say something that will make it feel less, and you think, no, actually what's really important is that you acknowledge that I am grieving and that it hurts and that I'm just there for you. But you know, people kind of go into solution mode instead of support.
They'll say stuff like, oh, at least you know you can get pregnant.
Yeah.
Yeah, horrible. I wanted to ask, is there anything that can prevent having a miscarriage?
Sorry, I didn't hear that one at all.
Anything that can prevent having a miscarriage?
So it's really, really important to remember that miscarriages are rarely caused by something you did or didn't do. Now, part of grief and part of managing grief and all the emotions that come with it is that people tend to blame themselves and they tend to do things. And, you know, I've had miscarriages myself, and despite the knowledge that I had, I remember thinking, it's because I bought things too early. I jinxed myself by doing that. Or, you know, it's because I carried something, or I did this, because you tend to go in kind of blaming yourself in that way. And that's why it's really, really important to remember that very, very rarely is it caused by something that you did or you didn't do. The most common known cause of early miscarriage is due to something called chromosomal abnormalities, and people really get worried when this is mentioned to them. So I'm just going to explain a little bit by what we mean by that. Chromosomes are bits of DNA with instructions that kind of guide your baby's development. Sometimes they don't develop in the way that needs to be able to develop for this to be a pregnancy. And when that happens, the baby can either get too many or too little chromosomes, and that stops baby developing, which means that the pregnancy won't go any further than a certain amount of weeks. Now, this happens very much by chance. It's not something that can be kind of prevented, and it also doesn't mean that because, you know, information comes back, if you've had testing done that says it was due to chromosomal abnormalities, that it's going to happen in another pregnancy. It is just absolutely by chance. So bearing all of that in mind, it's just kind of looking at the much broader picture. We can all get healthier, and we can all do things to improve our health before and during pregnancy. So I would start off by saying, to kind of reduce the risk, do all of the kind of good stuff before you become pregnant where you can, and then maintain it through the pregnancy. So making sure that you're taking folic acid, making sure you're taking it in the right dose, as it can be higher for some people, and they might need a special higher dose. So finding out whether what level of folic acid you need, and start taking the right amount at least 3 months before you start trying for a baby. Often people start taking folic acid when they start trying for a baby, or they find out they're pregnant. It's actually that buildup of folic acid in the 3 months before that is so important. So 3 months before at least, and that's a minimum, so you can take it for 6 months before, but in introducing folic acid supplements, and then in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy, eating at the same time a really healthy, balanced diet, having a healthy weight gain can also help reduce the risk, and also knowing what foods to avoid in pregnancy and why. So things like cutting out caffeine is really important. There are certain things that pregnant women are advised against, information you can find on the NHS website or on Tommy's as well. So once you find out you're pregnant, making sure you're aware of that. Also, cutting out or avoiding alcohol, recreational drugs, as well as stopping smoking, will improve your health and reduce the risk of miscarriage. Being active, whatever that looks like for you, it'll improve your overall health. It'll help you, help you feel better physically as well as emotionally. And then, really importantly, if you have any underlying health conditions, or you think you might have them. So that's a really important part, because most people with underlying health conditions hopefully are aware that they should probably have a conversation with their GP before they plan a pregnancy, or as soon as they become pregnant. People with things like epilepsy, diabetes, but also things like thyroid conditions, if you've got fibroids, or if you think something doesn't quite feel right, but you've not maybe had the testing done for that. So if you've got really heavy, painful periods, actually going and speaking to your GP before that, so they can test you for things like fibroids or adenomyosis. If you think you might have a thyroid condition, if you think you might be anemic, or if you think you might have a vitamin D deficiency, speaking to your GP, getting the treatment for that, so that when you enter into a pregnancy, you're as healthy as you can be, can absolutely help reduce the risk of a miscarriage.
Thank you. That was good.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if we've answered this one before, but if you have one miscarriage, are you likely to have another one? I think that might be a question people might want to know, especially with the recurrent miscarriages you mentioned before. What is the likelihood of that happening?
So the chances of having a miscarriage increases slightly with each miscarriage you have, which is why that builds up towards 3 miscarriages. But this will also depend, going back to what I just said earlier, at what stage the miscarriage happened, what kind of pregnancy loss you've happened. So was it a miscarriage? Was it an ectopic pregnancy? Was it a molar pregnancy? Was it an early miscarriage? Was it a late miscarriage? That will have an impact upon what your risk factor is, as well as things like smoking, BMI, underlying health conditions. So there's never a one answer to say with each miscarriage it increases by this much, because we're all different, and what happens is different in that way. We've got something called the Tommy's Miscarriage Support Tool on our website, which is quite helpful in being able, if you've had a miscarriage and you're thinking, what's my chances of having another miscarriage? You can use the tool to basically get an individualized response to kind of advice on getting healthy for another pregnancy, planning another pregnancy, but also will give you a kind of percentage chance of risk of another miscarriage in a future pregnancy, based upon the information that you can put into it. So it's kind of looking at your overall picture and kind of seeing what's happening with that. Now, if you've had 2 miscarriages, that's your chance of another miscarriage will increase a little bit, but you still have a much greater chance of having a healthy, full-term pregnancy than not. By the third time, we start thinking, are there any underlying causes behind this? And that is where we start thinking about testing, and testing can be done in lots of different ways. So looking at bloods to see, is there things like thyroid, undetected thyroid issues that might be there? Is there blood clotting factors that might be causing the miscarriage to happening? It's looking at the shape of the uterus. Is there something there which is a little bit different that again might be contributing towards that? Is there things like fibroids that need to be considered? So that's where the testing comes in, because we're thinking if it's happened a third time, but again, it takes someone to be able to it's like a jigsaw, and being able to put those pieces together and say, well, all 3 of your miscarriages very sadly happened at 7 weeks. So is something happening at that point? I mean, do you need to look at, or actually one of your miscarriages happened at 4 weeks, another one happened at 12 weeks, another one happened at 8 weeks. Can we try and find a pattern there? Or were they for different reasons? And do we need to look at all 3 of those reasons?
You know, it's great that you mentioned that about testing, because I was going to go off script and ask another question about testing and what that actually looks like and what form it takes. Because you always hear like, well, you can get tested, okay, but what for?
Yeah.
So it's great that like you've broken that down, and the fact that it looks like so many different things, obviously for different people. So that's quite helpful. That's very helpful. What type of support groups or counselling services do you recommend for women and families who are dealing with miscarriages?
So again, it will depend on where you are and what's happened, how many previous miscarriages you have. Like you mentioned, getting testing done. So we very strongly believe at Tommy's that people should get help, specialised help and support after one miscarriage. It is really, really quite hard to keep saying to people, after you've had this happen to you 3 times, then you can start getting help. So in regards to getting that specialist support, I would always say, if you've had one miscarriage, ask questions in the early pregnancy unit. Ask them, are you doing any blood tests? Do you want to do some blood tests to rule out things like I mentioned, anemia or thyroid conditions or a vitamin D deficiency, which we know can sometimes increase the risk of miscarriage, and ruling those things out. But if you're having a second or third miscarriage, again, getting that specialist help can help with testing and investigations. There's also lots and lots of support available in different avenues for people with the often overlooked part of miscarriage care, which is the emotional support and dealing with that grief. We've got a helpline that we have in partnership with 5 Times More, which we're so pleased to be able to do so, that can help specifically Black women and their families. So it doesn't just have to be the person who's having a miscarriage. Your partner, somebody in your family who's been affected can contact, arrange a call back with one of our midwives, and we can again do that jigsaw bit, piecing lots of different bits together and actually saying, have you got the support here? If you've got that support, how are you feeling in yourself? Would you require any support with counselling? We've got a collaboration going on with another charity called Petals at the moment, who we can do a fast referral to for specific baby loss counselling, and that includes any kind of miscarriage as well, to be able to do that. We've also got information on on our website, etc. as well, but there's other organizations as well, like the Miscarriage Association, the Ectopic Pregnancy Trust, who can offer support too, as well as always your GP can refer you for counselling, and sometimes it's really important to keep reminding yourself, which is sadly something that people who've experienced miscarriage have to keep doing, is that it's okay to feel grief. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel angry and frustrated. And these are very normal human emotions, because you have experienced a loss. And often people feel like they can't do that because it wasn't it doesn't have all of the parameters of a funeral and all of those things that are happening. They feel like, I'm not entitled to feel like this. I have to just go back to work, or I just have to carry on, or I just have to, you know, power on through this. And it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to feel that grief and loss and to explore it, and get help with it if you want to, or just to give it that time to be able to say, I was pregnant, I was having a baby, and now I'm not, and that is really hard and it's really painful, and these emotions are valid.
Yeah, very. I think it's important to make sure people know it's okay not to be okay. It's often you just expected to soldier on, like all of the things, all of the things that we mentioned, like it wasn't, you know, at least it wasn't that bad, and you weren't pregnant for that long. They just say all of these things and expect you to just soldier on, get back to work and be okay. But there is help and support out there. We're obviously grateful that we run the line and the counselling support together as well. So yeah, for anyone watching, the links will be below for direct access to that and information about that as well. But yeah, that brings us to the end of this session and this interview today. Thank you so much, Amina. And yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, it's been brilliant speaking to both of you, and, you know, get in touch with us at Tommy's if we can help in any way. But I know 5 Times More have amazing resources on their website as well. So, you know, I would just say, don't be afraid to ask for help. That's really important. It is out there. Just keep asking for it.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.